Thank you for joining me today. My name is Chandini Jaswal. I am a final year history honors student at the Meherchand Mahajan DAV College for Women, Panjab University, Chandigarh, and a core member of a students' initiative called the Karwa Heritage Exploration Initiative. Right. So, every year, the west part of our world, from February 1st to March 1st, celebrates this month called the Black History Month. And, the internet was flooded with a lot of discussions, speeches, presentations, photos on this very, very relevant topic, which got me into thinking that, how much do we on this side of the world know about their struggle? And as people who have had their own history of challenges, I started doing some research, and the results were both interesting and shocking. So I thought that we must put this up for this week's discussion, and the GSTS team gave me the opportunity. So thank you very much. And now I'll take you with me on this journey of recalling the Black history. Right. So I begin with the words of the I'll begin with the words of the Nobel Prize winner and Pulitzer Prize winner, novelist Toni Morrison, who rightly said, in this country, as in the United States of America, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate. Come to think of it, everybody as in a people of color. African Americans have been living in America for at least 500 years. We have our NRI friends, the Indian Americans who've been living there for about a century now. You have the Latin Americans. And yet for all these people, immaterial of how long they've been inhabiting this country, their nationality or their ethnicity is always, prefixed with the word America. But we don't think of it, we don't have that kind of an explanation for, say, English settlers or Irish settlers. Because America, as they say, nobody actually belongs to America. America is a melting pot of culture. Everybody's settled into America at one point or the other. So you have African Americans, but you don't have Irish Americans or English Americans. So that is Toni Morrison for us. And with this, I take us to the objectives, and we'll be recalling history. We'll be understanding complex terminologies. I hope that we do understand what discrimination, segregation means. We'll be reviewing literature. And of course, we would be analyzing the movement that has taken the world by storm as we speak, the Black Lives Matter movement. So without further ado, we begin. Right. So now, before we need to understand that where are the African Americans coming from? What is the status that they're coming from? So they did not settle, like I said, 100 years ago or 200 years ago for that matter. Their journey started in the early 16th century. And early 16th century aisa time tha, and for students of history, inko pata hoga that we have this term mercantilism. Right? Europe was expanding at this point of time, right? They were looking for areas to, expand their trade, and the main motive was to increase profits. That is what they were doing. So early 16th century mein, contrary to popular opinion, sabse pehle the people who inhabited America, the land of America, were not English, but Spanish people. And, American historians like Dr. Michael Gustavo and Dr. Joe Wright, they say that there's a very Anglican way of looking at sabse pehle the English came to America, but it's actually the Spanish who came in 1565 to America. And so this is the first, the first settlement that we have of Africans coming to America. That is in Florida, so which you see right here, the tip. In the eastern coast, the tip of the landmass of America is Florida. Yahan pe you have the first settlement. Nothing happens. So this happens in 1565. There's no details, so to speak. The real history begins from, 1619, right? So you have a dozen of Africans who were brought as indentured labor by English colonial powers in America from Angola, which is in West Africa. Right. Now, we need to understand ki inhe laya kyun gaya tha, right? So, the Africans and their build is such that, they're tall, they're broad, they were very broad, and physical, physique is such that they are, best suited for manual labor. But psychologically speaking, when you want people to work for you on your terms, you can't ask them, you're important to us. They will not work on your terms. if you want people to work on your terms, you have to tell them in one way that we are superior to you, that we are indispensable to you, not the other way around. And that is exactly how colonialism works. Yahan pe bhi, as in India maybe, South Asia maybe, and that same goes for Africa, America. So that is what they did. They brought Africans, by indentured labor, I mean people who are not paid money for the work that they're doing. So they brought them in, they were, huddled in ships. They crossed the Atlantic Ocean and they were dropped in the East Coast, yahan pe, Virginia, on the East Coast, right? And the picture that you see right here, this painting is an auction in motion. So on the left side, they've been huddled, the African slaves have been huddled here, and they've been brought very disrespectfully. I have pictures to show you that. So they were not brought ki ji aiye, please work for us. They were brought in ki chalo, we are doing we're doing a favor to you, chalo andar. And they were, handcuffed. They were made to wear ballast blocks. I'll have the pictures. And then they were sold for food, right? So 1619 when they come over, immediately laws are set into motion to ensure that the colonial powers have a long list of, free labor. Ya kam se kam paise dene pade aisa labor. So you have the Virginia law, which I quote, all children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of the mother. What does that mean? Or actually, obviously, because everybody brought from Africa was a slave. So this law ensured that you had a long list of slaves, an incessant supply of slaves available to the colonial powers at all times, right? People were not stupid. So you see, within 10, 12 years, there's this, united revolt by the slaves and the poor white peasants, right? They're revolting for better wages, better living conditions, better rights. But colonial masters or the European masters were very intelligent. Unhone, they sowed the seeds, if I could say, of racism right here in 1676, when they said, okay, whites, we'll give you protection, we'll give you better money, we'll give you housing, we'll give you liberties. Blacks up, you are enslaved for life. Now, this, like we study in Indian history also, is the divide and rule policy. Right, it was nipped right in the bud. Any kind of, united revolt, any kind of united rebellion, uprising was nipped right here in the bud. Okay, so these are two pictures taken from the official websites of two museums. On the left, you see a picture of iron shackles that were, wound on the hands of children. So, jo chote bache laye gaye the wahan se, they were made to wear these cufflinks or shackles. So this is a picture from the Smithsonian magazine, Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. And on the right, you see the ballast block. So I could not find a picture of the ballast block, but I can tell you how it was worn. So, this ballast block was placed on the shoulders of the adult African slaves, male African slaves, right? And their hands were bound with this. So it was supposed to be worn like this. So, jab unhe kharida gaya in Angola, in West Africa, they were made to wear this. So, everybody got an inkling of, they knew that what the picture that is in, our future is not a very pretty picture. So this is how they were brought. So look at, right in the beginning, look at the way they've been brought to work for them for free, right? So African forced labor, it increased manifold. People had African slaves, had children, unke bache, then slaves, as and when they had children, everybody automatically became slaves. Slavery obviously means you had no rights. They were exploited freely by their masters. And kya hota hai that, somewhere around 1800s, industrialization begins. Now, industrialization meant more exploitation, right? Because industrialization से colonial powers का profit बढ़ रहा था, production and input की demand बढ़ रही थी. So that meant that people working, यानी the slaves, they had to work harder so that they could meet the production demands. तो ये शुरू हो गया. Now civil war begins in 1861. So we have, 1676 may I finished my last slide. So you can understand I've skipped 100 years because the picture was pretty much the same. And we have a lot of ground to cover here. They have a lot of, very shocking history. So I've now come right to the Civil War in 1861. Now that has got some political background to it, so we won't get into it. But what I can tell you is that when Civil War began in 1861, people lost their lives in large numbers on the battlefield. And kya hua tha? the president of the United States of America at that period of time was Abraham Lincoln. And the New York Times says that even though Abraham Lincoln had said nothing about slavery just before the war began in around 1861, he said that slavery is not my business to speak. But just because heavy battlefield losses ho rahe the, then suddenly 1863 mein you get the Emancipation Proclamation, right, which says that all slaves are freed, which is quickly followed by some acts by the legislature, and which says that there's going to be no trade, everybody is free to vote. And 1870 में जब actually elections होते हैं वहाँ पे, people as in people like you and me, they stop each other from voting. Black voters नहीं vote करेंगे. So eligible voters का क्या मतलब था? All adult males, only males, right? And eligible to the black voters, but they were never included in the category of being allowed to vote. They stopped each other from voting, right? So technically by 1870s, African Americans, at least on paper, had the right to vote, the right to be, the civil liberties, unke paas right to be treated as equals, equality, right to not be bought. Slavery said they could not be exploited anymore. But now we have what we call as politics. जो southern states हैं, आगे आपको picture दिखाई जाएगी, जो southern states थी, they were very labor intensive states, ठीक है? And क्या होता है, around the time when elections come over, the southern states are unhappy. They say कि, तुम तो slaves को, you've almost made them citizens. We're not going to vote for you. We're not going to vote for you at all. So what happens is that 1877 May, you have the Jim Crow laws. Now the Jim Crow laws have got a very interesting story. Jim Crow was was a caricature of an African American, which was drawn in these kind of minstrel compositions in the 1830s by a white man called Thomas. And wahan se this Jim Crow became very popular. So this you see right here, it's taken from Wikimedia Commons. This is how common people used to view African Americans as. Obviously, so when 1877 May, you have the laws which are passed to please southern state voters, that okay, because southern state says that you have taken our free labor away from us, we are not going to vote for you. They ironically name the laws, very humiliating, very discriminatory laws, as the Jim Crow laws. And what did the Jim Crow laws say? Jim Crow laws decreed that you would have separate schools, restrooms, public transit, as in your buses, trains, water stations, your toilets, everything would be different now. When this was challenged in Supreme Court about 10 or 20 years later in the famous case called the Plessy versus Ferguson case, wherein it was said that, what is this? We were just given Emancipation Proclamation, just declared us free and equal citizens. So what did the judge say? Now, the judgment that was given in this case was shocking. They said that the segregation is not unconstitutional. That means that it is not illegal, as long as the black population gets an equal representation or equal facilities to them. As in, if the black population has restrooms to themselves, housing to themselves, hotels and motels to themselves, public transit to themselves, as long as they have this, then you can't call it unconstitutional. If they are being denied this, then we can call it unconstitutional. So thereby comes this populist slogan called separate but equal. Separate theaters, movie theaters crop up, separate water stations crop up, separate public transit crops up, as in, the waiting stations are different, the coaches in which one sits in the train are different, separate waiting rooms crop up, you have separate spittoons, you have separate housing. So this is what the Jim Crow laws did. Within a split of a second, all that the African American population had been revolting for the last 100 years was lost with the Jim Crow laws of 1877. Right. So I said that I would be showing you. So these are the states. So this is Florida, where you had the first settlement, right? This is Virginia, where you had the English settlement. And obviously, because the southern states are, like I said, they're very labor-intensive states. And this is where even now, the African American population is mostly concentrated in. So these are the areas where the revolt would hit. and the hardest. So this area would become witness to a lot of political scenes, strong political movements subsequently. Right. So 1900s, now we have reached the 20th century. We've reached the breakthrough of the 20th century. And I've called this political awakening is because now people are getting to terms with what is happening. Now they're realizing about, just like us, just like Indians, after 300 years of being, exploited, of being discriminated upon, it dawns on people, they get some inkling of actually what is happening to them. And the African American population forms an organization called the NACCP, and they're not unchallenged. You have simultaneously around the same time, you have the white supremacy terrorist group called the Ku Klux Klan, which is revived, and both of them will get into a lot of scuffles later. So this is what happens in 1900s to 1930s. Two major organizations crop up, nothing much, but you have a political representation for both the races in the country now. So 1929 is the period when America, not just America rather, the entire world witnesses a severe economic depression. Everybody loses jobs, blacks included, and those who did not lose their job were exploited. Right, and when the president announces some sort of relief facilities, better jobs, better wages, there begins what they call as the race riots, right? But the reason that I've labeled this entire slide as racism and despite is because coupled with these intense episodes of riots, of violence, you also have certain positive points happening, because life is not black and white. Life is gray. So you have, on one hand, they're fighting riots, but on the other hand, in 1946, the African Americans get to actually vote. So they've been freed from 1863, and they get to vote in 1946. 80 years later, they get the opportunity to actually vote for their president. And so this is what is happening. And in World War II, because World War II the Americans played a major role. So you have military introduced. So earlier, the military also had, segregation. So the African Americans were in one corner of the barracks, the white Americans on the other, and so on and so forth. But then they said in 48 that, we need to integrate this, because this is the fight for America. So this is racism and respite. The first half of 20th century is over. Now we are getting up to what we call as the civil rights movement. Now, before I go to the civil rights movement, which is of course the highlight of American history, it is important for us to understand that racism or racial discrimination was not just propagated through laws like the Jim Crow law or the Slavery Act or by the Congress. It was also through popular representation. Common people like you and me, we care about laws, but laws form just a small part of our lives. But how do you ensure कि लोगों के अंदर, that in the psyche of the people, this thing is cemented, right? You do that by one thing that they see a lot. We see a lot of advertisements. Newspapers, we have newspapers today, we have social media a lot, but that time, obviously, we just had newspapers. So newspapers and the posters that you see all around the city, pasted on the city, they started cropping up. And this is what a few of them look like. So I'll start on the left-hand side. So on the left-hand side, you see this is an advertisement by a detergent company, and this detergent company is quote unquote so effective that they can scrub a black man of their whiteness. So this is how they get their clients to buy their product, by guaranteeing them that this detergent can clean an African American man of his blackness. Middle line, you have a very similar painting, a similar poster for a whitewash or a varnish company, Elliott's Paint, and they again say that their whitewash or varnish is so effective that it can, rid a black man of quote unquote his blackness. And on the right hand, in the extreme right, you see a very famous company's poster, the Van Heusen textile company. All of us are familiar with that, and they say that their shirts are worn by all smart and modern people, obviously except the rural and the barbaric Africans. So this is in 1952, pretty recent. Right. Even if now we are not able to understand the gravity with which the gravity of the situation here, we have facts for us. 6,500 African Americans were murdered in race-perpetuated violent acts between 1865 to 1950. This has been taken from this Smithsonian magazine, and the statistics were taken in 2020. Okay, so this is the background in which you have what we call as the civil rights movement. Right, so this, and this there's a lot that is happening in the 50s. So I've just taken the most important and significant episodes during the 1950s. So it begins with what is called as the very famous Supreme Court judgment called Brown versus Board of Education. This declared that segregation of schools on the basis of race is unconstitutional, and the schools will have to be integrated quickly. Right, now iska problem ye tha ki this was not implemented quickly. Now whether it was an honest mistake or an intentional delay, we would never know, but this is what happened. 54 May, you have a law which says that you can't segregate schools on the basis of color. Rosa Parks, right, so this is another very famous episode. 1955 May, Rosa Parks, I'm going to discuss this in detail in the next slide, but yes, Rosa Parks was one of the first women. So like I said, this Jim Crow law had said for segregation in all public means of transport even, and buses were also arranged in such a way that the first half of the bus was reserved for the whites and the second half was reserved for the blacks. But if a white passenger was without a seat, the African American passenger had to give up their seat. Rosa Parks was one of the first people who said that she's not going to vacate her seat for a white passenger. Right. Then you have what is called as the Little Rock crisis in Arkansas, which is another state in the East Coast. And what happened is, because schools may, even now the Supreme Court judgment had said that the schools have to be integrated, but that did not mean that the people were ready to do that. So Arkansas's governor said that he's not going to allow African American children to study in a conventionally all-white school. So the president at that point of time, that is President Eisenhower, he sent military and to assist the 9 students who were being debarred to enter school. He sent military to help them get into school. Now, critics believe, or the historians of American history believe, that this was in a way a weakening point for the movement, because this in a way cemented this hate that people had for each other. That look, we've been forced to do something that we don't like. Hame to pata tha ye aise hain. So that is what was happening, right? And then, amidst all this, you also have the Civil Rights Act, which commissioned for a separate department to look into racism. And entire 1950s and the early half of 1960s saw a lot of bus boycotts, sit-ins, peaceful protests by people all over the country. Police tries to suppress it, sometimes by violent means, sometimes by non-violent means, but the movement continues to simmer for the better part of 1960s even. Right. Martin Luther King Jr. writes to the then President of the United States of America, President John F. Kennedy, that, quote, a second Emancipation Proclamation to free all African Americans from second-class citizenship is necessary. And his letter to President Kennedy, in a way, sets the Civil Rights Bill into motion. Martin Luther King then, goes on to give this very famous "I Have a Dream" speech of his, which I'm sure all of us are familiar with. And then this, after this, so the picture that you see on the right-hand side, this mass gathering that you see, almost all of them together went. So this was in Washington, D.C. They together went to the White House to, give their petition for this, for hissing the Civil Rights Bill. And they meet President Kennedy there. So I have a clipping for you from his speech, "I Have a Dream," Martin Luther King Jr. So I hope you could hear that. That was Martin Luther King Jr. Right. So I said that I'd talk about Rosa Parks. So Rosa Parks is often called the First Lady of Civil Rights. And I already said that, she refused to vacate her seat when she was asked by the bus conductor and the driver to give up her seat for a white male passenger. And what happens after this is that she's kicked out of the bus, and police charges are pressed against her. And that when this happens, when police charges are pressed against her, that is what sends people into fury. And they say that you're not going to allow us to sit in our seat. We will not sit in your buses. We'll find something else for ourselves. We're not using your buses. We're not using your means of transport. And this is the time when Martin Luther King Jr., who we just heard right now, started to emerge in the political scene of United States of America. And the reason that I've put an aesthetics here is because even though Rosa Parks is called the first lady of civil rights movement, she was not the first person to not vacate her seat for a white passenger. The same act was done by a 15-year-old girl just 9 months before her, that is in March 1955. Her name was Claudette. She was 15 years old, like I said, and she had also refused to give up her seat. But critics believe that the reason that she was not chosen as the face of this movement and Parks was because of her tainted personal record. She was a 15-year-old who had a child out of wedlock. So people felt that she's not an ideal leader. We want somebody who has the record of a saint to lead us in this movement. So that is Rosa Parks. So, I said, civil rights movement was a very peaceful movement, very non-violent movement. So this is one of the protests in action. You see that an African American lady is intentionally sitting in an area which is reserved for the whites, and this is in Alabama, 1963. Right. I thought that maybe we should take a few examples from literature to understand the point, right? So on extreme left-hand side, you see this book by Ida Wells. Now, Ida Wells is not a part of the civil rights movement, but her book is an eyewitness account of the lynching that took place in 1890s. Like I said, those 6,500 people who lost their lives. Wells paints a poignant account of one such lynching or murder that she witnessed. So that is The Light of Truth by Ida Wells. Next, we go on to the famous novel called To Serve with Love by Braithwaite. And this novel is, you also have a movie on this. So this novel is about, an African-American teacher being asked to take care of delinquent kids, ruffian kids, very indisciplined. He's been asked to, monitor them. So it is not just his journey as a teacher, finding himself and of finding a way to win over these children, but is also about his journey to find his way of being accepted as a teacher, being given the respect of a teacher in an predominantly white school scenario. So this is supposed to be a semi-autobiographical account by Braithwaite. The next two books, that is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin and Why We Can't Wait by Martin Luther King Jr. These are autobiographies. Both of them are very prominent civil rights activists, and this is about their journey of transversing their way through this movement and of their way on it's a justification of how they fought the civil rights movement. And in the end, I have, it's not a novel, it's a book, it's a poem called I Know What the Cage Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And the last two lines are like this: the cage bird sings with the fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. Right. So we had, just before going to the literature part, I had talked about, this Martin Luther King Jr. giving his speech and the entire entourage going to the White House to present their plea. And what happens is, even though Kennedy assures them that the civil rights bill is in motion, something very tragic happens around a month later in 1963. It's called the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. Now I'll tell you what happens is, Alabama was the center or the epicenter of most of the civil rights movement activities. And what happened is everybody was involved in the movement. Kids, adults, aged people, men, women, everybody was involved in this. And what happened was, around the afternoon time, it was the time when children used to get together to, discuss how they're going to go about the civil rights movement. And I had, in a couple of slides before, I talked about the revival of this white supremacist activist group called the Ku Klux Klan. And what they did was they intentionally chose an afternoon time when they knew that kids would be around discussing the civil rights movement, and they planted bombs along the church wherein these children had gathered for their discussion. And when the bombs were, when the bombs blasted, 4 kids lost their lives. And they said, the description was very gory, but I'd not like to bring it up here. And this episode, stunned everybody. And this was coupled with another tragic event, and that is Kennedy's assassination. And all the African American activists felt that all hopes are gone, right? Because Kennedy was a huge huge advocate of this civil rights bill, and this led to a lot of dissension within the African Americans, right, over the mode of action. Because now they said, one group emerges and they say that your non-violent means are clearly not helping us, so we have to resort to direct action. But the other group, that is the non-violent group, they say that we need to continue with our peaceful methods. Amidst all this, the new president that is sworn in, that is President Lyndon Johnson, he does have the Civil Rights Act passed, which legally declares all forms of discrimination as illegal. There's going to be no separate schools, no separate, no separate public transit, no separate hotels, hostels, no kind of discrimination. Everybody has the rights as the second person or the white person next to them has. So this is the Civil Rights Act passed in July 1964. Like I said, there was dissension. Now, even though the act is passed, but that doesn't mean that there would be an immediate change of hearts within people, because acts and laws are made for people like us, and you can't just ask people to shun away the 400 years of bias or prejudice and hostilities that they have for each other in a minute. So 2 movements emerge as a result of this, and those are, one is Black Power movement, which was a militant movement which fought against white supremacy, and the other was the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And this, they used to appoint guards around them to ensure that that the African American colonies, as in the people wherein the people used to reside, those are free of violence, and that there is no pelting of stones there or no bomb blasts. So these are the 2 movements that emerge as a result of this, because now on paper everybody is equal, but it's now about making a place for yourself in reality in the world. And you have some really this leads to a lot of positive acts or positive judgments. So Loving versus Virginia 1967 lifted the ban on interracial marriage. Can you imagine that up until 1967, if somebody married outside their race, that was illegal? So this is, and you couldn't marry somebody that you loved. And you have an excellent movie on this. I'll be showing you that. And the person that you see on the right side, Earl Warren, he's the man who not only lifted the ban on interracial marriage, but also declared segregation of schools as unconstitutional. And the reason मैंने उनकी picture यहाँ लगाई है, the reason I've posted their picture here is to tell you, is to make us break this myth of ours that all whites are against the civil rights movement and all blacks are for the civil rights movement. You had people from the other communities sympathizing with the movement and taking active part in it. So Chief Justice Earl Warren is one such example. Okay, even though a lot of positive things are happening right now, 1968 sees a lot of assassinations. Martin Luther King is gunned down, and so is Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was an active advocate of the civil rights movement, and he's gunned down. I'm not saying that he's gunned down because of this, but in politics, you never know. So that is politics and Robert Kennedy for you, right? Okay, so this is a very significant episode that happened in the African American history and the history of the world. So you have Tommy Smith and John Carlos. They had won gold and bronze respectively for America. And what happened is because Smith had won the gold medal for America, so as the tradition goes, the anthem of the country who's won the gold medal, that is played in the ground. And the moment the anthem is played, you have this. They've raised their clenched fists in hand, and they're wearing black socks to symbolize black poverty. And the person who won the silver medal, as in Peter Norman, he was wearing a human rights patch. So this was criticized not just in America but the entire world. Then 1968 May, they said that you're using a platform for sports to propagate your own political agenda. And uske baad, none of them, that is Norman, Smith and Carlos, none of them got an opportunity to ever represent their country again. Right. So I thought that maybe we should take one example of the films that were coming up, and this is the example of one such film. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, released in 1968. And ironically, this picture, when this film was being made, interracial marriage was illegal in as many as 17 out of 50 states of America. In Alabama, the ban was lifted as late as 2000. So in this scene, the heroine is, just telling her mother that she's in love with the man, but she misses out on quite an important piece of information.
Mom, it's John Wade Prentice. Isn't that a lovely name? John Wade. Joanna Prentice, I'll be.
So that was the scene from the film Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Right, on the other side of freedom. So because now that discrimination has officially been declared illegal, you have a lot of representation of the African Americans in politics. So one of the nominees for the Supreme Court, that is Craswell, he was known for having made racist remarks, and his nomination was immediately cancelled because of that. So you see the immediate change of heart and the change of mood in America after the Civil Rights Act. And you have Shirley Chisholm, who's the first African American woman to run for the presidential nomination. You have Douglas Wilder, you have Carly Mosley Brown, first timers African Americans to have representation in politics. But that does not mean that there was no tension. 1970s and 80s, there was a lot of abduction and murders of African American children throughout America. Right. So obviously, this is the culminating moment. That is the zenith for any movement, a very proud moment for entire America and world when Obama becomes president.
Progress has been measurable. The election of President Barack Obama in 2008 is seen by many to be a culmination of centuries of work in favor of racial equality.
This is the meaning of our liberty and our creed by men and women and children of every race and every enjoyed in celebration across this magnificent mall by a man whose father less than 60 years ago might not have been served at a local restaurant, can now stand before you to take the most sacred oath.
Right. So that was supposed to be the technical end of this, but considering that this Black Lives Matter movement is very strong, I pose this question to you, dear audience, now that we have reached the end of the presentation, that now that we've understood all that is happening in the world, what do you think of the Black Lives Matter movement? Do you think that it's a different movement, or do you think that it's the extension of this iconic civil rights movement? But a bit about this movement. So this started in 2013 when an unarmed African American boy was gunned down, shot to death by a police volunteer. And similar episodes happened in 2020. George Floyd was also killed by a white policeman, and so was Breonna Taylor, an African American woman. And this led to not just protests happening in America, but the entire world. They said that the African American population was at a greater risk of police brutality because of the color of their skin. So that was the civil rights, that was the Black Lives Matter movement. Right, and these are my references. So before I leave, so I now will be making my concluding remarks. And, I'll end with the words of another African-American poet, Maya Angelou. As human beings, we are more alike than unlike. Right, so when, we all often look at the West, and especially America, as the land of dreams, but at the end of the day, we forget that every country has human beings living in them. And every country has their own challenges and struggles to deal with. And looking at the presentation, we can see that America has had their own history of struggle, of challenges. But what is important, I believe, is that you rise successful out of this challenge. And even though progress is yet to be made, progress is always always welcome. But we can see that America has been able to make a considerable change in their outlook, in their politics, in their history, and has been able to do something significant, internationally, economically speaking. So, and that is what history is all about, I believe, to learn lessons from it. So, thank you very much. I apologize for any overtime that I've taken. Thank you.
It's all right. It's all right, Chandni, and thanks a lot. That was really a multicolored, history of blacks. That was really nice, the way you have presented. We have few queries of our budding listeners. They want to ask few questions related to your topic. So I would be proceeding one by one due to we have not much time. So I will be, considering few questions only. So sorry guys, I could not take each and every questions that had been put in the chat box. So I would be starting with the Akanksha Sharma. Akanksha Sharma, if you can hear me, you can ask your question by opening your mic. Akanksha Sharma. Okay, I'll be asking her question on her behalf. So I think there is some connectivity or she might not be present here. So she's asking, can we compare these slaves with the ancient Rome slaves who worked in Latif India? She's asking.
Thank you, Akanksha, for that question. Well, I'm not going to make any false declarations because I'm not that well versed with slavery. But what I can tell you is that from what I've studied about European slavery here, is that slavery or serfdom, as we had in Europe, all of them had, put some sort of a ban that people could not own property, people could not use their own appliances. The problem here is that inke saath bhi ho raha tha, that they were also being asked to, not have property. The thing was that slavery was being validated or verified by saying that it is right, we are doing this on you because you're a darker color skin. And anything that is based on identity, anything that is based on something that you can't control is incorrect. For European slavery, as in European serfs, white serfs, people of the same color being employed by serfs, there was still the scope of, emancipation. You could pay your dues and you could, in some way, as in Russia also, they could, free themselves. But this sort of slavery was, if I could say, hegemonic. It was intellectual slavery, intellectual bind on the mind, that you have to work for us, not because you're good, but because you are born this way and that is what you owe us. So you need to work for us.
Exactly, yeah. Right. The next question is from Shubhi Singh. Actually, I would be linking her question, what you have concluded with. You have concluded with the remarks that America is changing in its approach. But according to a Pew Research Center, about 2/3 of Americans say that blacks are treated less fairly than whites in dealing with the police and other state systems. So when these 2/3 population is sympathizing, then who are these people who wants to discriminate with the blacks in America?
If I understood well, Ajay, you said that 2/3 of the people are sympathizing with the movement. I would say that is a big change in itself. That speaks volumes of the changes that the country is seeing. 1890 May, if I go back to my presentation, 1890 May, there was a time when the white population, the white common people were asking black people that you don't vote, you don't use this voting booth. And now jump to 200 years later or 100 years later, you have people of every color, people of every gender getting together to speak कि जो ये Breonna Taylor के साथ हुआ है, what has happened with George Floyd is incorrect. And this change in ideology that you see is a big change in itself. And when I say change, I believe that it's about the kind of economic progress that America is making. We can't take that away from America. And they were able to do that with all that is going on in the country. And that is what history is all about, to emerge better out of the situation and to ensure that the country is on the path of progress.
Yeah, so America is changing, you guess, right? So the next question is from Vishesh. Vishesh, if you can hear me, you can ask your question by by unmuting yourself. Vishesh.
Thank you, Ajay, and good evening to all. माई क्वेश्चन इज कि जैसा कि आपने बताया कि दासत्व की आधिकारिक समाप्ति के बाद भी ब्लैक्स या दासों का जो शोषण हो रहा था, तो आपके विचार में जो शोषण था वो कानून निर्माण की जो जटिल प्रक्रियाएं हैं उनकी वजह से हो रहा था, या फिर जो वाइट्स हैं वो ब्लैक्स के या दासों के लिए जो इंफीरियरिटी कॉम्प्लेक्स उन्होंने बनाया था उसके अंदर उनको ढालने की वजह से हो रहा था? मतलब सोशल था या फिर कैसे आप इसको देखेंगे?
शुक्रिया विशेष। देखिए, जैसे आपने कहा कि लॉस तो बन गए थे, इमेंसिपेशन प्रोक्लेमेशन जो आजादी का ऐलान किया था इनके लिए, वो तो 1863 में ही हो चुका था. बट क्यों 1960s में अभी तक लड़ाई हो रही है? इज बिकॉज आपस में ही देयर इज नो एक्सेप्टेंस ऑफ द अदर पर्सन. एंड वी नीड टू रिमेम्बर कि लॉज जो हैं वो आदमी बना रहे हैं जो उसी सोसाइटी में रह रहे हैं, और उनको फॉलो करने वाले भी वही लोग हैं जो उस प्रेजुडिस का शिकार हैं. तो अगर लॉज बन भी गए हैं तो शोषण तो तब तक या एक्सप्लॉयटेशन तो तब तक होता रहेगा जब तक लोग आपस में अपने डिफरेंसेस सॉल्व नहीं कर लेते. सो आई बिलीव दैट यस, इट इज बिकॉज ऑफ दिस मेंटल और इंटेलेक्चुअल उन्होंने जो एक दूसरे के ऊपर डाला हुआ था कि व्हाइट्स ऊपर हैं, ब्लैक्स नीचे हैं एंड बाकी सारे कलर्स नीचे हैं, वो वहीं से एक्सप्लॉयटेशन तब तक चलता रहेगा जब तक इंटेलेक्चुअली एक दूसरे को एक्सेप्टेंस नहीं आएगी.
We can stop the question
Yes,
answer round here.
that is all. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Chandni, and sorry guys, if I cannot take each and every question. There are a lot of questions in the chat box, but we have some time limit also, so we have to say that. See also. So Chandni, that was really a great presentation, and you have literally talked a very good history about blacks in USA, and it could also be implied to other parts of the world also. So I would now again wants to call Sir, our guest of honor, to give his remarks over the topic talk in the event. So please, can you hear me, and you can give some remarks over that?
Thank you. Firstly, congratulations to Chandni for such a nice presentation. It's very, very broad sweep, trying to cover the entire history of the blacks. Well, I would have ideally liked the question answer session to continue because I was loving it, and it's always very exciting to see students coming up with their questions. And one of my suggestions would be that in other next episode of this talk, you should have more time for this question answer. Even the guest of honor can speak less. Let these students, because this is essentially a student access, platform, and I feel that it's really wonderful to see such good questions being asked, and also the speaker handling them so well. So this is next episodes you can have more time allotted for that. Well, one of the first things, I mean, obviously this as we all agree, and as Ajay you have already observed, that this has been a very enlightening presentation. We have been made aware of the history of blacks from, let's say, from the time the category black entered history, from, let's say, the 16th century down to the present time. She hasn't left anything in her large canvas that she has tried to portray. That itself is very challenging. When you cover such a broad area or such a time span, then you have very little scope to delve deeper into let's say specific sub themes. So you are then for example, let's say when you talk about the black literature or the civil rights literature, that itself could be a subject of a presentation by itself. So what happens is that when you are taking a very long sweep, then obviously you have to go very fast, and you cannot go very deep into the sub themes. So what that does is that it gives a very good bird's eye view. It gives us a very a large panoramic view कि क्या हुआ overall. इनको black history के बारे में बिल्कुल ही नहीं पता है, हम लोग के लिए बहुत ही अच्छी ये एक तरह का एक overview मिल गया, which is एक outline of the black history, जो कि इसको समझने के लिए या इतना जानने के लिए हमें काफी कुछ पढ़ना पड़ता है, और उतनी स्टडीज चांदनी ने हमें दे दिया इतने में, जो बहुत अच्छा है, जो दिस इज गुड. वहीं ये भी एक अदर वे ऑफ प्रेजेंटेशन ये भी हो सकता था चांदनी. द अदर वे कुड बी दैट लेट्स से अगर इन सब चीजों में अगर थोड़ा सा ओवरव्यू देके ब्लैक हिस्ट्री का, लेट्स से कि ब्रॉडली उसको थोड़ा सा आउटलाइन बना के 5-10 मिनट्स में, लेट्स से अगर आपने कोई एक खास थीम चुन लिया होता, फॉर एग्जांपल लेट्स से कि द वुमेन, द ब्लैक वुमेन एंड देयर हिस्ट्री, the civil rights movement, Martin Luther, and the way he became a symbol of the black protest in 1950s, or for example, if you could have examined the let's say the pre-Civil War black thing, what were the issues involved, that the economics of the slave labor, the way in which it raised issues, for example, issues for the Christian missionaries, how they justified this, वो कैसे इसको justify कर रहे। तो आप इसको मतलब अगर आप इसको thematically देख लेते तो मेरे ख्याल से ये होता कि किसी खास इशू पे थोड़ा सा ज्यादा डेल्व करने की जरूरत पड़ती। तो उसमें एक दूसरा एक चीज जो मैं लाना चाहूंगा कि प्रेजेंटेशन में एक अच्छा एक्सरसाइज ये है, थोड़ा सोर्सेज पे, थोड़ा आप हिस्ट्री के स्टूडेंट हैं तो आपकी चीफ सोर्सेज कहाँ से आप ढूंढ रहे हैं अपनी मटेरियल, है ना। तो फॉर एग्जांपल उसको थोड़ा सा हाईलाइट कर दे तो ये और भी अच्छा हो जाता है। और कुछ लोगों को उसमें थोड़ा सा जो इंटरेस्ट लेना चाहते हैं वो उसको देख सकते हैं। फॉर एग्जांपल वैसे तो आपने इंडिकेट किया ही है, सिविल राइट में आपने लिटरेचर दिया है, आपने फिल्म्स का भी जिक्र किया है जो है, और फिर उधर आपने जो है सिविल वॉर उसका भी आपका है। तो कि इन सब पीरियड में इम्पोर्टेंट सोर्सेज या आपकी ही प्रेजेंटेशन के जो इम्पोर्टेंट सोर्स रहे हैं जहां से आपने इंफॉर्मेशन लिया है, कुछ बिब्लियोग्राफी क्या है, तो उसका थोड़ा सा अगर आप जिक्र कर देना तो ये जो है सो और भी अच्छा हो जाएगा। मतलब ये एक अच्छा प्रैक्टिस है खास करके हिस्ट्री में कि हम इंडिकेट करें कि हम अपनी बातें कहाँ से कह रहे हैं ये। और दूसरा ये मैंने आपका ये नोटिस किया कि आप जो आप पर्सपेक्टिव है, देखिए ये एक ऐसा थीम है जहाँ पे कि आप न्यूट्रल होना बहुत मुश्किल है। ऑब्वियसली कोई ये यहाँ पे जो इनजस्टिस इन्वॉल्व है वो बहुत ही मैसिव है। तो उसका जो उन्होंने देखा है तो वो तो इसका नजरिया बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाता है क्या। तो अनदर थिंग दैट कुड बी ब्रॉट इन अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ हिस्टोरियोग्राफी कि इसको ब्लैक हिस्ट्रीज को उसके ट्रेंड्स क्या है, या ओल्ड पहले अप्रोच और न्यू अप्रोच क्या है, या इंपॉर्टेंट स्टडीज क्या है। फॉर एग्जांपल हालांकि मैं इस सब्जेक्ट से बहुत वाकिफ नहीं हूँ, इसलिए और भी मैं शुक्रगुजार हूँ आपका कि आपने इतना बड़ा कैनवस दिया। लेकिन जैसे ज्ञान पांडे हैं तो हमारे टीचर भी थे दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी की हिस्ट्री, उन्होंने हिस्ट्री ऑफ प्रेजुडिस लिखा है। there is a very history of prejudice, race, caste and difference in India and the United States. तो comparative account है of the blacks and the Dalits in India. तो उन्होंने उसमें उन्होंने जो एक चीज को खोजने की है कि how do blacks assert the idea of difference. See, one of the ways in which the dominated justify their domination is this: they bring this idea that we are different. You are blacks, we are whites, you are inferior, we are superior. These are the qualities black are associated with all the negative qualities, you see. Similarly in India we associate negativity usually with the idea of like caste inequality. Lekin what has happened is that blacks have lashed on, subverted this idea. Difference को उन्होंने अपना strength बना दिया है. Yes, we are separate but equal. Black is beautiful, the slogan "Black is beautiful." Yeah, for example, assertion of this idea that yes, we cannot be whites, but we are equal on our own terms, you see. And that has come out very strongly in let's say the sports bhi hai, Muhammad Ali hai, For example, in fact, sports could be another arena you could bring in. How that has also been an important arena where the black protest has figured. तो ये आइडिया ऑफ डिफरेंस, फॉर एग्जांपल, कि हम अलग होके भी जो अलग का आइडिया है, जो डोमिनेटेड डोमिनेशन जो डोमिनेट करने वाले हैं वो डोमिनेटेड पे लागू करते हैं, उसको जो डोमिनेटेड हैं उसको वो कैसे यूज कर लेते हैं. गांधी जी ने किया था इसको आइडिया को, और आज दलित लोग इसको यूज कर रहे हैं, द आइडिया ऑफ डिफरेंस. तो कुछ इस पर ज्ञानेंद्र पांडे ने भी लिखा है. तो और दूसरा फिर एक जैसे कि बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है कि ब्लैक विमेन जो है उनके बारे में कहा, दे आर डबली डिसएडवांटेज. यू सी, इवन ब्लैक सोसाइटी इज नॉट आइडियली इक्वल. उनके अंदर भी सर्टेन ये है कि जैसे ब्लैक वुमेन एंड ब्लैक मेल आर नॉट इक्वल. So women are doubly disadvantaged. So you could bring in those elements, for example, कि black women जो है, so कैसे especially certain what are the certain ideas which have figured in the खास करके literature में बहुत आता है, and how they do not want to let go of their difference as women and as black. So the idea of being different is being held on, and yet they're. तो बहरहाल तो ये सब कर सकते हैं, लेकिन what is very nice is to ये देखना कि आप उसको ये भी दिखाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि कैसे एक चेंज हो रहा है. How the idea that even white people, inequality is obviously lessening, and many whites, or within inverted commas non-blacks, are also coming to see the idea or the justification of having a really equal society. तो वो लोग, जैसे आपने कहा कि compared to 1890, let's say, to the present, there is so many people. The coming of Barack Obama becoming president also shows. एक चीज मैं चाहूंगा कि आप इसको आपके टॉक में आया है, लेकिन उसको थोड़ा सा थ्योराइजेशन में कहूंगा कि थोड़ा सा उस पर सोचने की ये जरूरत ये है, द इशू ऑफ वायलेंस. जैसे कि आपने देखा कि आपने पॉइंट आउट किया कि ब्लैक चिल्ड्रन वुमेन को एब्डक्ट किया जा रहा था, है ना, बहुत लार्ज स्केल पे उनका एब्डक्शन हुआ है. क्यों हो रहा था? Why do these subordinated groups, why do they have to suffer violence? Similar thing is sometimes, we can draw parallels in India as well. So how does violence fit into the scheme of, inequality? How does it reinforce, divisions in society? And how do for example, blacks also react by forming the Black Panther Society? So, no, but this is against the ideology of Martin Luther, who was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi. So is it that, is it difficult to have a non-violent struggle against this kind of prejudice? Can Gandhian paradigm therefore not work, where the issue of violence is coming in? So what is the issue of, that violence brings into being? So these are some of the things, which you can think about and bring it to being. Overall, a very excellent presentation. The way you have presented it, your language, your organizational slides, the points were so readable. Bahut badhiya. And this, I hope to, congratulations to the organizers, Manish ji, the college. This is developing as a very good platform, GSTS. Itne sare students, more than 60, I think 70 students at one point of time, which is a very nice, which makes me very happy personally as a teacher. Itne bade logo ko judte hue dekhkar, and they're so full of questions. So congratulations and well done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. And we'll definitely think over your suggestions that you have given, that we should go ahead with the question and answer round. We'll definitely, try to bring that in. And moreover, sir, thank you for turning to our invitation and be present here and gracing your talk with your enlightened word actually. And I really like that you have also talked about the Gyan Pand and everything. So that is really nice, sir. And we will definitely think over it and look over it. So thanks a lot, sir, for coming here and enlightening us once again. So now I would
Thank
like
you
to
so much,
call.
Ajay. Thank you so much, sir, for those words. I've noted down all the points. And sir, African American history and American history for that matter is a very new topic to us as students as well. So there was a lot of interest in there. So I've made a note of all the sub themes. I'll definitely work on these, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chandni, also. So now, as we student of history, as I say always, believes in continuity and change. So I would like to bring on the speaker of the next Sunday, Miss Tisha Jain. She'll be emphasizing over her topic, what she would be exactly speaking the next Sunday. Miss Tisha, over to you.
Thank you so much. The success of Mangalyaan in the first try only was a tight slap to those Indians who flew to NASA saying ISRO has no future. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tisha Jain from Shyam Lal College Evening, currently pursuing BCom Honours. And I'll be going to present my point of views and opinions over to the topic, why abroad, why not India? I'll be putting all my inserts and presentation over to this topic. Some of my higher objectives that I'll be covering over are Indian youth and its mindset, how Indian parental teaching is leading migration, rote learning providing half-cooked knowledge, how Indian abroad success stories are influencing our thinking, why is it so needed to stop brain drain in India, and can we overcome with this problem? These are some of my broader topics that I'll be emphasizing further on. The motive behind this talk is not only cribbing behind the reasons, but to find the solutions and work on it. As we all know that it's time to end the brain drain and get over to the brain gain. It's time for a greater mind to come up and work hard, not for anyone else, but at least for their own country. Reversing the brain drain is a key priority for us. Hoping to see you all. So I request everyone to join me the next Sunday to grace my talk with joy. Thank you. This was Tisha Jain.
Thank you, Tisha. That was great. So sweet. And I also, from the Sachs fraternity, and Sachs fraternity also invite the budding listener to come to the next Sunday and listen Tisha Jain over her topic, why abroad and not India. Thank you, Tisha. Now, just a little request with the Chandni, that Chandni, if you could share your experience with the Graduate Scholar Talk series that you have had. So it would be nice, like, how do you feel, and how, like, what are your views actually, and some suggestions that you want to give to us so that we could also improve in future.
Definitely, Ajay, and I was overwhelmed and super delighted.
I think Chandni, your father is joining, Girish Agrawal. I think he's your father or uncle.
Sorry?
No. So someone named Girish Jaswal is joined here.
Yes,
so
he's
your
my
father.
He's my grandfather.
Okay, sir. Welcome, sir. Thank you for joining. Thank you. Yeah, over to you, Chandni.
Yes. Right. So thank you. So like I was saying, I was overwhelmed and very delighted to have received this invitation from Shubham. So thank you, Shubham. I owe it to you first. Thank you so much. And the entire team, Ajay, Subhi, Samriddhi, they were with me the entire time, and Manish sir. Thank you so much for those very insightful and constructive feedback that you gave me, and that has helped me make the presentation better. Thank you, Parijit sir, for the words that you give, for the kind words of encouragement, and the suggestions that you've given me on the sub themes. So this was an excellent opportunity for students like me, and I congratulate the Graduate Scholar team for this initiative. I hope to be called again, and thank you so much.